and welcome to the Madhouse UK podcast. Good to see you all again, and this is the next one in our hopefully regular daily podcast. So I was given quite a good topic today by David Pennywell. Thank you again, David, engaging really well with the podcast so far. And he asked about something that happened quite a few years ago, actually, in 2014. And it happened in the chat room, which I would like to remind you at 7 o'clock tonight we are doing a chat room, so hopefully some of you will be there. But in the chat room there was a discussion, and while there was a discussion going on, I took the part of something called the All-Seeing Eye, which is an occasional name that I use, and related a prophecy. Now, it was a bit of a mystery. Nobody knew quite what it was about. It was mostly just for taster purposes. But I've been asked by David if I can kind of explain some of what went on. Well, interesting, because some of it is still unfolding, and you think, well, that was 5 years ago. You'd think it would have all unfolded, but a game that runs once every 2 weeks does move at a steady pace, and some things do take a long time to unveil. But I'll do what I can. Let's go through it and see what it says, and I'll try and explain a little bit about what was going on back then. So thank you, David, for pulling up the screenshots of it so that I didn't have to go looking for them myself, so I can get it exactly right. And here we go. There's a bit of description at the start. The All-Seeing Eye says, "The sound of a clock can be heard quietly ticking away in the background. Tick, 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 tick. There is a bong, the clock striking one. Somewhere distantly another sound can be heard, gentle water moving like waves on a low tide. There is a low moan, like something in great pain, but it is far away. For a moment the soft sounds of church music fill the air. All sounds are now gone. There is only a slight echo of your words. Abruptly, a female voice is heard by all those within the embrace of the mind link." Now, that was referring to the people in the chat room. "Children of man and children of other, hear this. The end of your world comes. In 5 parts shall it be known. In 5 parts shall you be delivered unto your end. A distant sound of horse hoofs can be heard. A cold and featureless male voice can then be heard. Where in past times the lands have prevailed over menace and threat of many kinds, no time before has there been a convergence. No single threat this, but combined their menace shall bring you low. A sound of many voices cheering against a backdrop of fire and destruction. The female voice speaks. From deep within the ground they come, driven out in search of homelands new. These ancient enemies burst forth and sunder all that lays before them. Their hatred is boundless and their numbers vast." Okay, so that was the first of apparently 5 menaces that are being predicted. Something that comes from beneath the ground, that doesn't normally live behind the ground, and bursts out and becomes a threat. That may or may not have happened. Some of you may or may not know what that means, but there was an event back in about the time that could describe that particular threat. The next one, it says, "The alien sound of the Jenna, for those who have heard it, echoes from far away." Well, the Jenna were a very old threat to Bereni. They were a psychic monster that came from either space or another dimension. It was never fully explained. And they were a threat for a while, very dangerous. Right in the early days of the game, they were one of the first big threats that happened. So their suggestion in the prophecy here is that the Jenna may be involved in this prophecy. But it does say echoes from far away. So if the Jenna are involved, if the prophecy is correct, then that's something that might take a while to unfold. Has clearly not unfolded yet because we haven't seen a resurgence of the Jenna. It goes on to say, "The female voice again, then from the south, near forgotten, a terror rises from the frigid wilderness and walks once more the living lands. Terror rolls before it, and behind there is only death." So this is something from the southern glaciers. It's suggesting that there's a third threat, which is going to come from where it's very, very cold. Now, there is an ongoing mission in an area where it's very, very cold, and that mission has not completed yet, and the players haven't got to the bottom of it, if you like. So perhaps that's related to that. "The soft and barely audible sound of snow falling. The male voice speaks now. For ages gone, the 7 have been content to spew their bile with limited intent. But now, with written pacts declared, they rise from the bowels of that wretched place and walk unbowed beneath the sun to take anew their thrones." So, the next threat being described there is the 7. That's how it talks about them. You may or may not know what that means. I suppose I can give you a clue, and the clue I would say is there's really only one threat to Bereni that's ever happened that came in a numeral of 7, and it's very closely related to Poldoon. Now, make of that what you will. Poldoon is currently in the news, so I'm not going to say too much more, I think. A female voice. From elsewhere comes the power that had forgotten more than most of you have ever known, and yet, intrigued, has returned and looks over this world with envious eyes. To rest beneath his gaze is to be destroyed, for he is the embodiment of power. So, there you go, another threat listed there. So you notice that's actually the 5th threat, but the Jenner wasn't really listed as one of the threats. The Jenner was kind of as if it was going to come with one of the other threats. So again, make of that what you will. But this new one here could be almost anybody, couldn't it? There's lots of big threats that have happened both since the game began and in the history books that date to before the game. So that one isn't very clear, I guess is fairly safe to say. I think some people might know who it's referring to. Moving on. Where am I up to? Oh yes, to venture forth and boldly go and reach for new horizons is what has taken those who call this world home to great heights. But with every action there is a reaction. With every cause or case there is a consequence. Your time has come. The tally is high. The cost will be everything you hold dear and more. And more. The dead shall walk the land once more, but the reprieve shall not be all it seems, and a harbinger of the end to come. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? The dead shall walk the land once more, but then it's described as a reprieve. So it's not referring to undead, I don't think, to you. It's more referring, if it's a reprieve, you would think it must be people who have died and made their way back to life. Now, players of the game will know that if you die in the game, your character can then continue in the land of the dead. There's no technical way back from the land of the dead, and yet, have people come back? Has anyone made their way back from the land of the dead? Is this part of the prophecy legitimate? Well, you know the answer to that, I suspect. A new voice speaks, quiet, musical, shy. 5 great threats come. Your gods shall weep and turn their faces from the slaughter. A king shall fall, a kingdom brought to despair. Death is on the wind, but be strong. There is always hope. A king shall fall. Well, the king did fall. And not long after that, the king fell, and well, you've all seen the way that things have gone since then. And now we've got a situation where we have a new ruler. So at least part of this prophecy has happened. Now, it's not an incredibly... obviously, kings are going to eventually pass on, so it's not a massive success of the prophecy, but it's not wrong. The female voice, hard, cruel, says, there is no hope. Each of these 4 threats are great enough to spell your doom, but yet, before the last, they pale into nothing. For one mind binds them, one will compels them, one power unites them, and when she comes, your world shall be blown away as leaves upon the wind. The female voice, again, very quiet, as if from far away. 5 questions you may ask me, and I will do my best to speak the truth. Ask now, once you have decided what the questions are to be. So to understand what I was doing way back in 2014 when I did this. So this is part of the chat room, which we now are running weekly, so you'll be able to get a bit more involved with this sort of thing. So the gist of it was, I put together a prophecy that covered the sort of things I was thinking about in the background of the game at the time. And those things occasionally change, that's why it's prophecy, and prophecies aren't always true. But broadly, my mind tends to stay set and then reacts to what players are doing and what's happening. So things aren't always exactly what they seem, but it gives people something to engage with and to ask questions about in the chat room. So I then gave people the chance to ask some questions, and there were a bunch of players involved, and some of them asked questions, and I answered them in typical cryptic fashion. So we'll just go through the questions and answers that were given. First question answered is, what is the nature of she, the mind that binds them? The response of the all-seeing eye was, the nature of she is from beyond the veil, the end point. Well, the veil in the game is the curtain between life and death, which people are never supposed to be able to pass through, which would suggest that someone from beyond the veil is some entity or aspect of death, I would propose. That would be certainly the way I would be coming from if I was thinking about it. Question 2. Where will the first of these threats materialise on Myriad? Myriad is the name of the whole world in which all the bits of the game exist. And the answer was 2 threats are already present. The arrival of the next is unclear, as too many events may have an effect, but soon, very soon. So, well, we've already described that some of those threats have already happened. Some of them are still developing, so that wasn't incorrect. Question number 3. What can we do to defeat or prevent the threats? And the answer was, each threat must by its nature have different forces to combat it. Communication will assist you. No force that exists at this time can defeat she, the 5th. Well, as far as anyone knows, I don't think she, the 5th, has arrived yet. So either the prophecy is wrong or something is coming. Question number 4. Who are the seven? Surprised that they didn't know the answer to this, but it says the answer was each manifesting a trait that those who dwell upon the world would be best avoided, lest they be deemed sinners. Well, what's the best? I'll tell you the answer. I think is the easiest thing to do here. So there exists within the game lots of creatures which are uniques. Now that there's only one of them. They'll never come back if they are destroyed. Quite often it's very difficult to destroy them, so if they're killed they go into like a holding place and certain events can bring them back again. So some really great threats can keep returning. These are your kind of legendary monsters. And 7 uniques that exist within the game are the 7 deadly sins. They always existed in a very deep dungeon under the city of Poldoon. It goes levels and levels deep, and you get to a point where certain levels are dedicated to different members of the 7 deadly sins. Now, players in the game have not encountered all 7. They have encountered reference to all 7, and they've probably encountered, I think, 4 or 5, but not quite all of them. So, referring to the 7 refers to the 7 deadly sins. That's why that answer makes sense if you think about it. And the 7 deadly sins, are they currently a threat in the world? Well, maybe some players know the answer to that and some don't, but they certainly were, some of them, in a dungeon under Poldoon. And once again, we hear Poldoon's name, don't we? So what does it say here? Question, which king shall fall? And the answer was the Berenian king shall fall, which happened. And then they asked, the 5th question they asked was, where did each of the sounds we heard come from? And the answer was that the male voice was Ruminal, the dark god of schemes, and the female voice was Misatni, the dark goddess of prophecy. And this final speaker then identified themselves as the goddess Mariel and said farewell. It was, I think, quite a gotcha moment, because to find out in the chat room you're speaking to a god, in-game god of course, was I think kind of fun. So the dark god of schemes and the dark goddess of prophecy would suggest that what you're hearing is both a prophecy and a scheme to manipulate you in some way, and I think that was a pretty fair analysis of what that entire thing was. So with all of these sort of things, flavour is put into the game, but if you think about a real fantasy world, any real fantasy world, and if you delve into the history of those sort of worlds, you'll see that there's lots of stuff going on, and it doesn't all get explained, and some of it just adds to the flavour, and this Dungeonworld game is no different. Some things you'll never know the answer to, and other things will become very clear quite quickly, and some things take years to happen. It is a steady moving game, like its nature suggests. So that's kind of where we are. Hopefully that answers some of the questions for you. Now, if you're in the chat room, you can ask some more if you like this evening. Hopefully we'll see you there soon. But until then, I think that's pretty much my podcast for tonight. So, laters.